and Google Analytics is used to identify what users did once they are on your site. So a little bit more detailed explanation of Search Console is that Search Console gives you detailed information how Google's search algorithm sees your website and the information on it, how it presents that information to users who perform web searches, and how Google thinks those searches are associated with the information that Google has collected about your website. It's also a tool that lets you see issues with your website's indexing and allows you to add and remove pages from Google's search index. Whereas Google Analytics, on the other hand, is a user tracking tool for your website that allows you to get detailed information about user activity on your website. You can easily see where a user entered your site, how long they were on your site, the path they took through your website, and where they exited the site. Additionally, it can give you real-time user information about who is currently on your site and what they are doing on it. So one of the other major differences between the two is that if you're doing advertising through Google Ads, this information is directly accessible through Google Analytics and allows you to directly associate the information in your ads account with the information in your analytics account. Abbreviated information from a handful of Google products can be viewed within analytics to save you some time when you're trying to review things. Okay, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen here. Okay. All right, so we're going to just go ahead and start by diving into Google Search Console. All right, so the first thing we're going to start with is going to be the overview. And actually, give me 1 second. I need to have something going on here on my end. I need to do that. Do that. Here we go. All right. So first thing we're going to start with is the overview section. So when you first load into Search Console, this is the view you're going to be greeted with. The overview page has an at-a-glance reference for some of the basic info for your site. The performance window gives you total web searches for the past 3 months plotted by day. The coverage window shows you the total number of valid web pages that Google has indexed and associated with your site. It will also show you pages that have errors so you can troubleshoot the issues on those pages. And then the enhancement windows will show you any of the valid structured data markup and accelerated mobile pages and Google site speed data that Google has associated with your website. The other thing I want to mention is that this whole presentation kind of is built on maybe you having some knowledge of how to add your site to these tools. If not, when we get to kind of the halfway point, just ask the question and I can quickly run through it, because all of this doesn't really help you if you don't know how to get your site into it in the first place. All right, so moving on to the performance tab. So when you get to the performance tab, this is where a majority of the useful information for your website is going to actually be located. When you get to the performance page at the top of a window, there's a filters bar. It's this bar that's running along here at the top. By default, the filters are set for search type web, and the date range is set for the last 3 months. The filters bar allows you to drill down and really analyze the information that Google has on your website, broken down in a few different ways. And we'll cover this as we go through the individual sections. As we move down the page, there are 4 boxes and then a line chart. This is a visual representation of all of the information that is located in this section. So right off the bat, one of the things I recommend doing is clicking on the average CTR, which is your average click-through rate, so you can actively see if there's an active spike in the data that we're looking at, to see if something there that is completely outside of the norm for the rest of it. And I recommend, once you've looked at this and you can look through it and see if there is anything, after you've done that, I recommend turning off all but one of the boxes so you can go through and you can look at each piece of information one at a time. The information in this section includes every page of your site that is indexed currently by Google. So once we turn off the other buttons, we are only looking at the number of clicks that took a user from a Google search results page into your website, meaning that a user performed a web search and your website is one of the results, and then they clicked on your website. Next, we'll click on the total impressions tab. And now we are looking at the total number of times your website showed up in Google search results after a user performed a search. And next is the average click-through rate. I'm going to refer to it as CTR. Is the number of times your site was clicked on divided by the number of times that it was actually displayed. And then finally, your average position. This is an average of all the pages on your website when each page was displayed in the search results. So the position number will be different for every individual user. So this is an average of all of the users who got to your site combined and displayed for you. This is not a hard number that you can use to definitively state where your website is ranked. For each person that visits your site, this number for them will be different. So unless your website is exactly what they search for, or your website is considered an authority site by Google, such as like Amazon or Walmart, Google will display those results first 99% of the time. The rest of the time, it's going to be a variable number. So the information that is displayed in these charts comes directly from the Google database, and you can use the filters to display the information as broadly or as narrowly as you like. So I'm going to turn all these back on, and I want to break down the information that this chart can actually show you. So below the chart, there are different pieces of information that Google collects on your website. The first tab here is queries. These are the terms that users search for, and Google displayed your website in the results. Pages is a list of all the pages that Google has indexed on your website. Countries breaks down the site info by country. Devices does the same for devices. Search appearance breaks down which version of your website was displayed in the results. And finally, dates breaks down the info by date. So everything that is below this line graph are actually different filters that you can apply to the displayed data. And by applying those filters, it allows you to narrow down the information you're seeing based on those filters that you apply. Okay, so that's basically everything that's located here in this specific section. Now I want to explain how each of these sections can actually help you learn something about not only your website, but how Google displays your website to users and where it displays it to users. Starting with queries. Search queries are all of the terms that users typed in the Google search bar, and Google decided to display your website. By going through this list, you can get a good idea of what Google thinks your website is about and compare it to what your site is actually about. So if you were seeing things in this list that are in line with what your website is actually about, then you know that your SEO and the content on your site has been deemed legitimate by Google, and it'll display you for these terms. So looking at the site we have up here as an example, if your website is about computer repair and a majority of the search queries that we're seeing are about computer repair, you can generally assume that the SEO on this site is in line with what Google thinks it is about. If, on the other hand, that you're seeing queries that are not in line with what your website is actually about, then more than likely the SEO on your site needs some work. So if your company, for instance, sells house paint, and all of the search queries you're seeing are related to automotive paint or marine paint, then Google's algorithm is close, but you need to go into your SEO on your site and make sure that you're being very clear with what the content your site is actually about. The other thing that you can use the search query section for is to find additional terms that your website is being listed for that you might not have thought about for optimization. Google's search algorithm attempts to associate terms that it thinks are related to your website and puts them in this list, and will end up displaying your website for those terms. So if, for instance, the website is optimized specifically for computer related services and someone does a search for laptop repair in Google's algorithm, the algorithm is intelligent enough to associate those two things together and display your website. That is why this list can give you a lot of additional information. And if you have one term that is raising to the top of that list and it's not something you're optimizing your website for, it'll give you the opportunity to go through your website and maybe create a web page for that specifically. And then by optimizing it, you can get ranked for that term, and then it will get ranked for that term specifically. So moving over to the individual pages, this is where you can see all of the pages that Google has indexed and associated with your website. The data structure is the same as queries, but it's broken down by individual page. So you can see how each page that is on your site is performing on Google. We mainly use this section for three different things. One, we want to make sure that Google is actually seeing all of the pages on a website and that the pages are actually getting traffic. Two, we want to see if there are any rogue pages that were not created by us that exist in the Google search. And three, to actually see how each of the sites pages are performing. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. Making sure that Google is actually seeing all of the site pages is important, because even if you submit a sitemap to Google, and even if Google says the site is listed in its search index, there's always a chance that one or more of your pages is not accessible to the user. This is a good place to verify that all of your web pages are accessible and that they are being seen by users. So the second part of that, checking for rogue pages, this mostly applies to websites built using an online editor such as Squarespace or Wix, or a content management system such as WordPress or Joomla. If your site is compromised by a plugin or malicious attack, the most common thing that happens is that additional pages are created on your website that redirect users to other sites, or they attempt to get users to call fake phone numbers with messages stating that their computers have been infected with something. So if one of those pages is listed on your domain, it will show up in this list, and you can investigate that and then try and figure out where it came from and get it removed from your site. Finally, the last part of that was using this area to see how each page is actually performing. Looking at the information here, you can see how each page ranks, so you can monitor the average position up and down as search trends in your site SEO change. By monitoring how often each page was clicked, you can see if the changes that you're making with your SEO is actually affecting how users are interacting with your search results. And monitoring your impressions will help you see if your SEO changes caused your site to suddenly drop page rank, and you can go and you can kind of course correct what you're doing with your SEO. So countries, devices, and dates break down the same information. It's just broken down by each of those categories. So I don't really want to dive into them that much because it's pretty straightforward when you get in here. With countries, if you're looking at a specific area that you're trying to advertise in, or your website is dedicated around a specific country, then just making sure that it's in line with the information that you're seeing in the back end here. Same thing with devices. Like if you have a mobile first website, making sure that the mobile users are actually the number one group of people that are using your site. And then dates, again, it just allows you to classify and filter this information based on date. All right, and then the last section I want to focus on is the search appearance. This section breaks down which version of your website was presented to the user. If your site is currently taking advantage of AMP pages, it'll show up in this list, and I'm going to go over what AMP pages are a little bit later. There's not like a single sentence explanation for that. So, all right, so now we've covered all the information that's in this section. I want to talk about the real power of this tool, which is isolating individual points of data to analyze your website. Everything below the main graph is clickable, and when you click on one of the items in the list, it creates a new filter, filtering all of the rest of the information on this page using that specific point of data. So looking at queries, for instance, I would like to know how each of my website's pages are performing for the search query, computer repair Bradenton. So you can come down, click on that, and now all of the rest of the queries have been filtered out. The query has been added to this top bar. And now all the information that I'm seeing that's displayed in this chart is isolated around just that search term. So as you can see, currently there's only 2 pages on this site that are being associated with that search term, but I can get a general idea of where this site is ranking, where the pages specifically on this site are ranking for that search term. And then I can see the other group pieces of information, the total clicks, total impressions, the average click-through rate, and the average position based on just that search term. So using that same kind of method here, let's say I want to see what terms a specific page was found for. So let's go ahead and just click on the top level domain here. Now this list has been filtered to just this single page. And when I come to queries, I can now see a list of all of the search queries that were used and which of these search terms Google decided to display my website for and in what position. So the nice thing about this is you can actually really pare this data down and continue to add filters to this top bar. You can either do them by using this little drop down when you click on new, or by just simply clicking on one of the items that's down here. And it really will help you identify what people are actually searching for and what Google thinks your site has to do with these actual results. So by adding two pieces of filters, I can look at PC repair and then I can look at this website. I can track to see what's been happening with this term as far as Google displaying my website and what my average position is for that site. So the biggest thing that we end up using this section for from an SEO standpoint is to determine that if a page that we have optimized around a specific key term is underperforming compared to other pages with similar SEO. For instance, if we have a page that is optimized around computer repair Bradenton and we're being listed for automotive repair in Bradenton, we know that there's something on the page that we need to go in there and look at because something's not quite in line with what we've gone through and put the time and work into on that specific page. So the other thing it allows us to do is allows us to monitor how our website or an individual page is performing over time. So if we have a non-web-based advertising campaign running and it launches on a specific day, we can monitor how that advertising campaign is affecting not only our search rank, but our number of clicks and the number of impressions and the click-through rate of the website. So that'll give us a real-world piece of data that allows us to determine, at least in the sense of search engines, how well that advertising campaign is affecting our website. Every company that I sit down with and I go through this, we always find some point of data that they hadn't seen or hadn't considered with their own SEO, be it where their site is being found, the terms they're being found for, and a lot of times we'll end up finding pages that are still on their website that they didn't even know about. So that's basically what we use this chart for. So next I want to actually open the floor up for a little bit of questions about the performance section of Google Search Console.
If anyone does have questions, this is Erica. I just wanted to remind you we have the Q&A feature and the webinar chat. And also, if you'd like to ask a question over your audio, just raise your hand and then also remember to unmute yourself so we can hear your question.
Okay, so Nick asked a question in the Q&A. Does this search represent 100% of Google searches? Are there other searches? This data is limited to just Google searches. This is pulled directly from the Google actual database of stored searches that people have actually done. And the information that's in here is associated specifically with your website. All right. And then Christina asked, how long does it take from updating the SEO on a specific page to then updating the position for the page? That's something actually we're going to get into with the very next topic that's part of this. There is a way, once you've made an update to your page and then pushed it live, that you can see the changes that you've made to your page show up in Google's index right away. As far as how quickly the changes that you've made affect your actual ranking for everyone else in Google, that's something that takes time, and that's something that Google does on a basically, I'd say, a site-by-site basis. But a lot of times it comes down to with your not only the size of your website, whether or not your website is an authority, but also the quality of content that you've presented in the past to Google. So if you're constantly giving Google good content, then they're more likely to update your rankings for everybody based on your new information faster. Okay. Nick Choate asked voice search. Currently, they don't have voice search specifically added to this, and I'm not sure when, if they ever will add that to this. Um, I would say that'd be something to pay attention to with more and more connected devices getting added to people's homes. That information is going to end up needing to be displayed somewhere. I don't know if it'll be here, but I'm sure that at some point they're going to have a console that'll tie into this, because a lot of the integrated home stuff does connect directly into their natural search database. It ends up tying the information more in line with just contextual searches. So Kevin McNulty asks, when you export the data with the button in the upper left-hand corner, what type of file do you get as a result? There's two different types that you can actually export that I know for sure. You can actually do it as a sheet or Excel document, or you can do it as a CSV. So it basically breaks all this information down, and it uses your actual filters when you export the data to create that document for you. All right, and then Dave Grace also asked, what are clients' biggest misunderstanding you see about the data here? The biggest misunderstanding that I've personally come across when I'm talking to my clients about this is the position data. The one thing that they hone in on is that position, and they assume that position number is solid, and that is what Google will display your position for your website to every single person that does a search for one of these terms, which unfortunately isn't accurate. The search position isn't, let's say you have 10 people, and 5 of those people, you're the first result, the other 5 of those people, you're the 100th result. You're going to end up with the average of those search positions, and that's the number that displayed as that position number. So it's helping my clients understand that, yeah, this will give you a good idea of where Google thinks you should be listed, but it's not 100% where your site is listed. And it really comes down to where your site is listed based on people's search history and kind of what they've done in the past. And then Kevin McNulty asks, how far can you go back time-wise? So I have mixed results with this personally. You can go back and you can change the date range back basically as far as the search engine was created, if there's data there for your website. With this system, a lot of times when you try and enter a custom date range, it Google's system for this is very, very, very data and detail heavy, so it slows down to the point where it just stops functioning correctly. So I recommend just using the actual points that are actually predefined in there, because they already have charts pre-built for that data in that time period. All right, so it looks like all the questions. All right, we're going to move on to the next section, which is the URL inspection. The next thing I want to cover generally is the actual tools that are built in to help you tell the Google algorithm what is part of your site and when you have updated the info on your site. And we're going to start with the URL inspection. This button doesn't actually take you to a page. It just highlights the search box at the top of the page. And when you put a URL into this box that is associated with your site, it outputs a page that tells you if your URL is on Google. I'm going to go ahead and click on this one. What it does is actually going out to the Google index, and then it pulls back a results page. So it'll also tell you if the page that you're looking at is in the sitemap that you have submitted to Google, if the page is mobile friendly, if there is an AMP version, or if there is an AMP page linked to this. and if there is any structured markup on the page that Google can read, and if there is any review structured markup on the page as well. The main thing that we use this section for is to verify that everything is working with the page and that it's in our sitemap, and also to let Google know when we have made a change to the page. So on this page, there's a request indexing button that lets you submit a priority request to the search crawler to crawl the page again and look for changes. This lets you get revisions that you've made to your site into Google's search algorithm much faster than relying on the robot to do it on its own. So once you have made a page, I've seen this request indexing take effect within a matter of minutes, and then other times it can take up to a day, but it's much faster than waiting for Google to crawl it on its own, because I've seen Google crawl times be between a month to 5 months before they crawl a page again. So utilizing this, if you push a large change to your site, allows you to get those changes into the search algorithm much faster. So the next thing I want to look at is the coverage section. So same as before, it has 4 boxes that you can turn on here at the top that each will display a different piece of information. So the first section here is the errors section. This covers pages that Google could detect on your site but could not index for some reason. This could be because of a coding issue on the page, or if you have a robots text file on your website, it's telling the crawler not to go to those pages. Next is the valid with warnings. These pages could have a coding issue, or maybe they should not have been indexed, but Google indexed them anyways, and now it's questioning whether or not it should be in the index. Then the next one is your valid pages. And then next is your excluded pages. So excluded pages covers duplicates and canonical pages, which are pages with duplicate information or exact copies of another page. An example of this would be if you have a secure and an unsecure version of the same page on your website. And then it'll also cover 404 pages, which are broken links or pages on your site. And then the AMP pages. So all these pages are pages that Google can see, but decided not to include in this index. And again, as with the previous charts, you can click through all this information and you can actually browse to get a little more information. So I'm just going to go to the valid page list. When you click on submitted and indexed, you can see all of the lists that were included in this site's sitemap, and Google actually said, yes, these are legitimate pages I would like to index. Whereas if we go back into the same one, we go indexed but not submitted in sitemap, this means that it was a page that was added to your site, but you did not update your sitemap. A lot of times what we see in this section are blog posts or just like child pages that are part of your website that were added and weren't added to the sitemap. Typically, these are the pages that you end up needing to look at to go through and redo SEO on, just to verify that they're there and then get them added to your sitemap. So speaking of sitemaps, moving on to the sitemaps, this is the section where you can actually go through and add sitemaps. I recommend submitting a new sitemap anytime a new page is added to your website that you want Google to index for sure. And one thing to note with the sitemap, just because you've included a page in your sitemap, that doesn't mean that Google is going to index that page. The same thing goes if you don't add a page to your sitemap. If Google has a way to access the page, it's going to attempt to add it to its index, which leads us into the removal section. So the removal section allows you to have pages from your website removed from Google's search index. A lot of times what we see in this, like a lot of times what we use this tool specifically for is removing admin consoles, or if you have a page that has data that you don't necessarily want the index to have, but for some other reason Google is able to get to it. A majority of sites will probably never end up using this tool, but if for some reason you did need to use this, there is a way to remove pages from Google search index. All right. Now, any questions about the site, the index here? I just give it about a minute here. Wait to about 2:40 and then Move on to the next section. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward then. So next is the enhancements. The enhancements section is the newest section of Search Console that has been added. It contains site speed, mobile usability, AMP, and detected schema data. Starting with the site speed, this is a new tool that Google is still in the process of implementing 100% and rolling out to everyone who has a Search Console account. This information is exactly the same as going to the Google PageSpeed Insight website. So when you actually load this up, let me go to a different property here. What you'll see is you actually see a list of your slow URLs, your moderately speed URLs, and your fast URLs based on the quantity of people that are visiting your site. So if you have a site that doesn't have a huge amount of traffic, then you probably won't have this generated into something you can just go and do on your own using the PageSpeed Insight website. And what it does is the site itself generates a score and it indicates how Google thinks your site will load given real world variables. One thing to keep in mind with this section is that none of this are exact numbers. They are just a guess according to Google. It's always a good idea to run your site through that tool specifically, but it doesn't take into account external factors as far as your load times that might either help or hurt your load times, because Google can't detect every caching system that exists out there. So if your website has been put on what's called a cache, which is just a copy of your current website stored someplace else that loads extremely quickly, then it just goes to your normal website and just uses that instead. So the next thing is mobile usability. Google's crawler does a bunch of things while it's browsing your website. One of the things it does is render out each page of your website and see if there are any elements that are too close to each other or are overlapping. It does this to verify that the site is usable on mobile devices, and any page that Google detects are not mobile friendly will pop up on this list. So this list is not always 100% accurate. So if you see a page on this list, just check it on your own end, just making sure that when you look at it on a phone or a tablet, that there isn't anything that's overlapping. And if you verified that, what you can do is go back to the URL inspection, go to that page, resubmit it, and then probably wait about a day and see if Google reindexes the page and if the warning goes away. All right, next, moving on to the AMP section. So in the AMP section, you're going to find a list of AMP pages, AMP stands for accelerated mobile pages. And in this list, what you'll see is valid pages with warnings and completely valid pages. Same as before, you can use this to fix errors that you might not have caught. And you can see which of the pages Google actually considers valid. You can click on each of these sections to get a complete list of each. So an AMP version of your website is a cut down version of your main website that follows a very strict set of rules that Google has created so that the pages load very quickly on mobile devices. This is something that existed for a while now, but has not been widely adopted as of yet. Overall, Google categorizes these pages differently than a standard web page and gives them a special icon when a user does a mobile search, and it shows up as a little lightning bolt next to their search. And it signifies that the user is going to look at a very, very fast version of your website. And when Google takes a snapshot of your site after you uploaded that, and what it does is it keeps it there, and then every time you make an update, Google's system will actually go through your whole AMP version of your site and duplicate it on its servers so that when a user does do a search, they're getting presented information off of Google's servers instead of off of your own server. So the big thing with the AMP pages is that there's two ways of handling it. You can either handle AMP pages by creating a whole nother website, which is what is in most situations the easiest thing to do. You create a duplicate copy of your website following Google's rule, and then you have a standard version of your website, which is for everybody else. And then you let Google decide which user gets presented which information based on the search that they did. And the information between the two you'd want to keep identical. And there's actually a piece of code that allows you to tell Google, hey, this page that you're currently looking at has an AMP version. Go ahead and just send the user to the AMP version so it loads faster. All right, moving on. The next section is structured data markup, which is also known as schema. So first I want to explain what schema is, and then I'll kind of get into how this actually works in the Google Search Console. So schema was initially founded by Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex as a collaborative community activity with a mission to create, maintain, and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages, in email messages, and other digital platforms. What it is, simple terms, what it is schema is a way that you can add code to your website that allows you to tell Google exactly what each element contained on your web page is about in very fine detail. It's very complex, very time consuming, but allows you to get information about your company directly into Google's search engines right away. And it also allows you to get things plugged into things like Google Maps, Google Reviews, just very, very quickly. So when you're looking at a website, this section that we're looking at here on the screen is actually the schema. It's information that is broken down by, you have a top level description of what it is, and then everything underneath that is a part of that code. So as you can see, looking at here, I can tell just by looking at this right here, this is what this site's logo is. So if Google decides to display this website in search results on a phone, the logo will show up in the search results because I'm telling Google, hey, this is what my logo is. And then anytime you have competing results on the internet, so you have your main website, you have your Facebook, you have a Twitter, you have a LinkedIn, you have a YouTube channel, all of those things compete for the same space in search results. You actually even have a way using this on your own website to tell Google, hey, my website is the same as all of these things. So when a user does a search and you want to present my website, please present my website first. Don't worry about displaying the other stuff first, just my website. So I know, so you can basically, the user knows, hey, this is what you search for. Everything else comes secondary. So one thing with this, when you're looking at this in the back end in Google Search Console, what shows up in Search Console will be different depending on which pieces of this data has been detected by Google. So in this situation, looking at this website, it has detected the logos tag and it has detected the review snippet tag. And specifically with the logos, like I said before, it allows you to tell Google, hey, this is my site's logo. And the review snippets allow me to take reviews from multiple places, put them on a single page on the site, and then say, hey, these are all of my reviews, Google, please index these. And there's a chance that those reviews will show up in the Google Search Console. The biggest takeaway from this is that by adding structured markup to your website, it gives you the ability to very specifically tell Google, this page contains X information. So the top level one that most sites are going to have is called the organization data schema. It allows you to add things like your address, your company information, the longitude and latitude can be added. And what it does is it'll automatically read through that data and add it to different places throughout Google's search system. So Google can completely override and ignore what you're telling them. But typically what I've seen is that if the data that is on your site and it's in line, if the schema data on your site is in line with the rest of the content on your site, Google goes through and says, hey, all of this stuff seems to be pretty well in line. So we'll go ahead and trust you. And obviously at any point they can rescind that. But for the most part, as you add this structured data to your site, it allows Google to more accurately index everything about your site. So, and the main reason this tool is back here is because as you go through different sites and different properties that have this, then you can actually see what Google is reading about your site, and you have some control over that by editing your own site. Now, the last section that we're going to talk about in Search Console is going to be the links section. So the link section about Search Console, you're going to find 4 separate boxes. The first is the top linked pages on top linked 2 pages on your website from outside sources. This is a list of all of the pages on your website that other websites are linking to and how many times that page is linked to. The next thing is going to be top linking sites. This is the list of the websites that are linking back to you and how many times they are. Next is the top linking text. These are the words on other websites that are in the actual link that are pointing back to your website. And finally is the internal links. These are the number of times each page on your website is linked to another page on your website. So going through and clicking here, when you're looking at these, basically it allows you to see if you have a single page on your site that is well above the remaining pages as far as other websites pointing to it. So if you have for instance, we'll look at this one here, the artist application. When you're looking at that, if there's a lot of websites that are pointing towards that artist application page, what you can do from an SEO and kind of an advertising point of view is, okay, I have a lot of people coming into this page. What I should probably do is put information on that page that can possibly either A, generate me sales, or B, generate user submissions as far as contacts and leads go. The other thing with this is if you have a kind of like I was talking about before, the rogue pages, if you have a rogue page on your site and it has a lot of external stuff going into that page, you can also use this to identify like, hey, there's something wrong with my site that I need to go through and correct. The top linking sites, pretty self-explanatory. It's literally just a list of all the pages that are pointing towards your site. These can be things that either you've typed onto the internet or other people have typed onto the internet and on these individual websites, and now they're just pointing into you. And the top linking text, these are literally the words that would go inside of the link text on a website. So anytime you have a link, whatever the words are associated with that link, that's what shows up in this list. And then, like I said, the internal links, it's literally what each page on your website is pointing to. So you can see how many times, like in this situation, 535 times the homepage of this website is pointed to by other pages on the website. And that's basically what this section is used for. It gives you a good idea of who's pointing their website to you. And if it's not a company you have a relationship with, it'll give you something that you can reach out and say, hey, I noticed you're pointing a lot of pages to my site. Let's talk about how that can benefit both of us. All right, questions? All right, the Q&A. So Carrie, should everybody have AMP logos and review snippet? Mine goes from speed experimental to mobile usability and then to events followed by the site link search box. So no, that section specifically, it's like I said, it's going to be different for everybody. So if you don't have that, then I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. What I would consider though, if you aren't seeing that stuff, would be looking into getting an AMP version of whatever the content is for your site created, because right now there isn't like a hard rule from Google saying like, yeah, you need to have an AMP site, otherwise we're not going to list you in our mobile search index. But there is some evidence to show that Google will start to index those AMP pages first, because Google values how fast a page loads compared to other sites. So if your site loads much faster than your competitors does, Google has a tendency to show you first just on that piece of information alone. Same thing with the schema data. It just gives you a lot more control over the data on your website than just assuming that Google's search system will figure it out on its own. All right, Nick Choate asks, how often do you suggest someone visit and analyze a search console? If you're actively doing, or if you're actively making updates to your website, I say every 2 weeks you should definitely take a look at this. There's pieces of information here that you might not necessarily pick up on otherwise, that might indicate that either A, something went wrong as far as the content you've added, or that Google's promoting you way more based off of the changes that you made. And then it'll give you a good indication that your SEO changes that you made to your site are headed in the right direction. The same thing could be applied to an advertising campaign. So if your advertising campaign, for instance, starts to go live, then you can come in here and say, hey, my advertising campaign is not having as large of an impact just because my level of users has stayed basically the same throughout over time. So I'd say like about every 2 weeks is what I typically recommend. And with all of our clients, that's what we kind of go through. Every 2 weeks, we're going through all of the data that's in here to look for any kind of anomalies or anything like that. All right. So that basically covers everything that I wanted to go over with Search Console. There's a lot of information that can be had here, and a lot of it can be useful. So if there's any other questions about anything I've covered in here, let me know. I'm just going to take a quick drink and be right back. Oops, sorry about that. All right, so the question that Nick Choate had is, would you suggest using Search Console or Google Ads Analytics for paid search? So the Search Console is more geared towards your organic results, and the analytics is more geared towards tracking people who are actually on your website. And with the paid ads through Google Ads, people are getting to your website. So analytics is going to be where you're going to want to look at that data more, because all of that data can actually be pulled into analytics and displayed, which is one of the sections I'll be showing off here a little bit. All right. So Kathy asked the question, how do you link your website to Google Search Console? All right. So when you first come to this site, it's going to actually pop open a window that's going to look like this. So in here, you can select, there's two different options. You can add a domain level, which covers anything under your domain. So, and your domain is going to be what comes after the www dot. So the BradentonPCRepair.com, that's what's considered the domain. So if I have a mobile version of the site, that's m dot BradentonPCRepair.com. It'll be included automatically. If it's secure or not secure doesn't really matter with this. And it requires something called DNS verification. And that just comes down to wherever your website is hosted, there's a line of code they need to add that verifies that you are the person that controls this website, and you want to have Google be able to read and display information for it. The second way is using a URL prefix, And what that allows you to do is it allows you to tie this information directly, or actually it allows you to associate it directly with subdomains and things like that. So if I do have that mobile version, the m dot bradentonbcrepair.com, and I also have just my standard www.bradentonbcrepair.com, I can track those two pieces of information separately. There's not really a recommendation on which way you want to do it. I typically like doing the domain level because you can go through using the filters in the pages section to filter down whichever group of pages you actually want to focus on. So, and that's the two ways. And then after you've gone through and done this, you now have access to all of the data that Google has ever collected on your website. All right. Any other questions about that? Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to jump into analytics. So as I said before, Google Search Console is how users found you, and analytics is what they did once they got onto your website. Most of the time when you're speaking with an SEO company, the data they're going to be referencing is going to be coming from analytics. A majority of Google's tools for websites can have some of their data linked into analytics. This allows you to create custom viewpoints of data that are very narrow compared to all of the data that is available in each individual platform. With all of the data we're going to review here, we have the ability to control the time frame for the data we are looking at. By default, it is set for a 14-day period, but you can go back and see data from the beginning of when your website first had the analytics tracking information installed on it. And for each of the following sections, you can have multiple filters applied to the data. So you can review the information narrowed down to very, very small, either times or points of data that you actually want to track. So these sections are going to be quite a bit larger than what we were looking at in Search Console. So after each of these small sections that we're going to go through, I'm going to pause to ask for questions because there's a good chance that something I say is going to trigger some questions. All right, so we're starting with real time. Similar to the Search Console, each section has an overview page that gives you a small snapshot of the data that can be viewed in that section. In the real-time section, you can see the users that are actively using your website right now. You can see a list of the top active pages, as well as the website that the user came from, or a list of the keywords the user searched for and found your website with. Typically, if you see not provided anywhere in analytics, it's because the user is either not signed into a Google account or they have the security settings set to deny any data collection. So each section allows you to see more detailed information by clicking on any of the terms that are actually listed in each of the sections. So all the data that is displayed here is actually displayed over a 30-minute period. So by clicking on the overview section, you can see right now on this site, there's 37 active users. You can see where they're being used, where the site is actually being used from. And you can see the active pages that the users are currently on. So when we click on locations, locations lets you see the active user locations broken down by country. And by clicking on country, you can actually break it down a little bit more by city. Fortunately, in this view, there's no way to get anything smaller than that. And after you've clicked on someplace, it actually allows you can remove the filters at any time. It adds them to this little filters bar here at the top. The next is going to be traffic sources. Traffic sources gives you a real-time listing of where the active users came from and their acquisition type. So if you ever see none on this list, that means the user that's currently using your site typed your website URL directly into their search bar. Organic comes from a search result page. Social comes from a social media network, and referral are other websites that are pointing at your website. So you can, like, as you're looking through this, you can see here's direct, this person came from Google, and you have your organic and none. All it's doing is it's breaking your data down so you can kind of figure out where users are coming from, and you can track that information in real time. When we switch over to content allows you to see what pages the users are actively looking at and the active number of users per pages. Pretty simple and straightforward. Next is events. Events allow you to define an action you want users to take and allows you to track each time that action takes place. There are trackers that can be set up in analytics, in Google Ads, and in Google Tag Manager that allow you to track these actions. An event can be anything from a user landing on a specific page to a user clicking on a button to view a pop-up window or making a purchase. This view gives you the real-time data that these events are generating. So if you launch an ad campaign and you want to see how it's actually performing in real time, you can come here and see if your users are actually taking the actions that you were expecting them to. So if they take that action, you can then count the number of completions, and then that gets moved over into the conversion section. So this is where real-time conversions will show up. So just because a user starts an event doesn't mean they complete the event. And once a user has actually completed whatever steps you want them to take, it shows up in this list. And again, this is something that you would define yourself in any of those three platforms I mentioned. And the end goal of any event can be something like filling out a contact form or completing a purchase. And then once that step has completed, it'll show up in this list. All right, and that's the real-time section. So do we have any questions about real-time? All right, doesn't look like it. Next, we will move on to audience. In audience, there is a lot more information to dig in here about your user. Some of it will be useful. Some of it is just going to be redundant data. So as you go through this, make sure you're not getting too granular with what you're looking at and that you're focusing on the overall trend that the data is actively trying to tell you. So starting with the overview, it lets you focus down and see the information based on a couple of different factors. You have your total users, your new user sessions, the number of sessions per user, your total page views, your average pages per session, your average session duration, and your average bounce rate. And all that information is displayed here directly underneath this top line chart. So by clicking on any of the words, and basically in any of these sections, it'll update the chart based off of that filter, which is this drop down. So one thing to keep in mind with analytics is that if there's a piece of data that's tracked by analytics, there's a good chance that whatever chart you're currently looking at, you can apply a filter based on the information that is somewhere else within analytics. So the other thing you can do is you can look at the demographics of the users that are displayed in this chart and break it down by country, city, browser, and so on and so forth. So it allows you to get a lot more detailed information about the information that is in this chart just by clicking on a couple buttons. It applies a filter for you automatically. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be lifetime value. And the lifetime value generates information based on the value of how much each user is worth from which acquisition channel. So in theory, the more often a user visits and spends time on your site, the more likely they are to spend money with your company. So over time, their value increases. This section allows you to determine which traffic source is generating the most revenue for your company and allows you to adjust your advertising spend accordingly. If all the data here is pulled from Google AdWords and Google Tag Manager, and their values are determined when you create the conversion tracking in Google Ads. So looking at this list, your organic search is obviously your Google search results. Your direct is people typing in your website directly. And this information is going to be, like, as far as these terms, is going to be very redundant as we go through each of these sections. So referral is other websites sending you traffic. Your social is your social media network. Your affiliates are other companies that you have a relationship established with that are not Google. So, and it's not something that you have an ad campaign with. So if you, whatever your company is, if you have another company that you partner with and you send each other traffic, this allows you to track it in that section. Your paid search is your regular Google ads listing that shows up in Google search results, and your display is your Google display ads that run as embeds on other websites. So next, moving on to audiences. Audiences are something that is defined by each website's owner. It is something that you would sit down and establish as you are preparing to either start a new advertising campaign or you are preparing to remarket to a group of existing users. An audience can be something as broad as a group of users who have viewed more than one product on your website, and excluding users who have actually made a purchase, to something as complex as tracking users who spend a minimum amount of time viewing a specific page but not making a purchase on a certain day of the week. So these can be relatively complex or relatively simple depending on what piece of information you're actually looking to track. And then they show up in this list. So unless you're actually setting up an audience in the admin section or in Google Ads, you're not going to see anything show up in this list. Which leads us into demographics, which this is information taken directly from the individual users. And this is where a lot of security and privacy concerns really started to limit the amount of data that is listed in here. So you can see this data is broken down into two categories. You have age and gender. By clicking on the actual age portion of this chart, it breaks down your average age range basic by groups of ages, and you can look at this again, the same information, the acquisition type, your behavior type, and whether or not they made any conversions, broken down by age range. Looking at this chart, a majority of the users who are using this website are between the age of 25 to 34. And all of the charts have the ability to add additional filters that help you really narrow down all of the information that's here. Because I mean, you can see there's quite a bit of information in this chart, not necessarily useful until you start adding a secondary metric or a secondary dimension that you want to look at this chart with. So the next section is going to be interests. So interest covers user data broken down by their search history and browsing habits online, and really allows you to see what kind of users are using your website. By looking through this data, you might be able to discover some new places to advertise to gain a larger market share, or to see if the user group you are targeting with your ad campaigns are pointed towards the right people. Say, for instance, you're selling art online and you come into this section and see that the affinity category that stands out the most is value shoppers, then, and your prices are typically higher than what a value shopper would want to spend, you'll know that the people you're using your website are not your target audience. And at that point, you can look at it and say, hey, I need to look at either my site's SEO or my actual advertising campaign to figure out who I'm actually pointing to. And then when we click on affinity categories, what it does is it breaks down the top level search data that the user fits into. By clicking on one of these categories, you can see the info broken down by age range. So looking at these affinity categories, shoppers and value shoppers is my top affinity category. And it breaks that same information down by age. So the people who are in that age group are typically 25 to 34. So you can surmise by looking at this data that the people who are back here, people who are using this site are value shoppers between the age of 25 to 34. And this is a piece of information you might not necessarily have otherwise. So if you have a general idea of the users who are actually using your site and you come in here and this lines up, you know that your target persona is in line with what you're actually looking for. Whereas if you come in here and the data is completely skewed, then you know that the people who are actually getting to your site, like I said, are not the people you're actually trying to target. The other portion of this is your in-market segments. So this section shows what the groups of people are interested in that are more likely to purchase products or services based on conversion data pulled from other parts of the website. So the people who are generally converting on this site are doing searches for employment, so they're taking those actions and from the events that I kind of spoke about a little bit earlier. So, and this breaks down, and again, none of these lists are exactly accurate from Google. They're very, very close, but they can't be 100% accurate just because of user privacy laws. So this is a pretty good idea of what these people who are using this website's interests actually are. All right, so next I want to go into geo. This is geographic location and language data. It's pretty simple and straightforward. You get a language that most commonly uses the website, and you can actually also look at a chart to see where a majority of the users who are using your website are coming from. And then this information can be broken down a little bit better because it can be broken down country, state, and then city. So you can see what your top performing state is in a country or region is in a country, and then get a lot more granular with it and say, in this situation, hey, San Francisco is my #1 hotspot. So I don't necessarily need to do advertising there if you want to look at it from an advertising point of view. Next is behavior. So starting with new versus returning users, this can show you the breakdown of the two types of visitors with average bounce rate, pages per session, average session duration, and if you have Google Ads connected, your goal conversion rate data as well. Frequency and recency gives you a count of the number of visits per user. So when you're looking at this chart, this really, really illustrates the importance of getting information in front of users as quickly as possible. So the number of single session users, which a session is a user coming to your website one time. So the number of single session users on this specific website was 10,000. So you had 10,000 people view the site one time. Without leaving the site, they viewed a total of 38,000 pages. The number of users that came back to this site twice was 10% of that. So it was down to 1,700 people, and they viewed far less pages. So just going through and looking at this chart, you can say a majority of the users who are visiting this website are only going to be here once. So whatever information I want to get in front of them, I need to get in front of them right away in hopes of capturing them. So a lot of times, if you'll see that you have a majority of your users in the 2 or 3 sessions, that either means that the user couldn't find what they were looking for, left your site, came back, searched again, or it means that they're unintentionally leaving your site and coming back, which there's a number of things that can cause that. And that's a little bit more on the technical side of it. So engagement is the breakdown of average time spent on a page on your website, broken down by the number of sessions, similar to the previous section. So similar to frequency and recency. This will give you a breakdown of where your average user is likely to fall in terms of time spent on page. You will more than likely have a large upfront amount of 0 to 10 seconds, which I typically ignore unless it's 90 to 100% of all of my sessions. Looking at the remaining session durations, you can usually see where your average user will fall. This chart can also show you the number of pages that the user clicked through. So looking at this average session duration, it creates a nice little arc here that the average user on this site is going to spend between a minute and 3 minutes on the site. And they're going to view an average, like again, this is all of the users combined, the number 10. So that's an average of 1,600 users compared to all of the actual users that came through and viewed the site. So that means that whoever's visiting this site and looking at this data, they really are taking the time to try and find whatever information they're looking for. Whereas again, if all of the rest of these durations and were only had maybe 5 to 10 users, that means that they're getting to your site, they're not finding what they're looking for immediately, and they're leaving and they're going someplace else and never coming back. All right, next is technology. Technology is literally the information about the device that the user used to view your website. In this view, you can break it down by browser, operating system, screen resolution, screen colors, like Flash version. There's a few others. Uh, Basically, it allows you to see who is using your site technology wise. So in this situation, the number one browser is Chrome. So you know that making sure that your site is formatted to perform correctly in Chrome is probably a good idea. But if, for instance, your target market is skewed older, they're more likely going to be using Internet Explorer or Edge. Then making sure that that is actually on this list and it's showing up at the top of the list is a good thing. So the one thing to take away from this is if you built your site to work in a specific browser, such as Internet Explorer, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be compatible with Chrome and vice versa. So seeing how many users are coming from each browser allows you to say, hey, I need to go and take a look at my website from this point of view, and then make sure it's actually functioning for all of those users. Mobile is the type of device that the user was using, either a tablet, a cell phone, or a computer. Here you can see specific device type data. So if you want to design a portion of your website for a specific device type, you can. Like if you know that you're getting a lot of traffic from iPhone users, then you can design a page that actually takes the top notch into account. And whenever the users come to that page, then they'll be presented with that version of it. That's mainly what this is used for. So you can figure out what type of device is the most common for your users and build your site accordingly. So we're going to skip over cross device and custom because they're actually still in beta. So benchmarking, and actually we're going to switch accounts here. Benchmarking is a very valuable tool if you're trying to do basic level competitive research. Here you can compare your site's average user behavior compared to other websites that share their data with Google based on the industry type that you told Google that you're in. You're not going to see specific company names and things listed here, but it does give you a pretty good indicator of how your website compares to your industry standard. This information can be broken down by channels, location, and device type. So all the information that's listed in here is comparing your website and how users interact with your website to other websites that are in your industry that are on the internet. So let me get back into channels here. I'll load back up. So the site that we're looking at here, the amount of direct traffic and the amount of new users that are coming to view this site is 62% higher than other companies in a similar market. And a majority of them are new users. So 60% more than other users in the market. Whereas people that are finding this site from organic search is below the rest of the market average, according to Google. Same thing with new users and the number of sessions. And all of this data is pulled from other companies' websites, aggregated, and then presented in this format. Okay, and the very last thing we're going to cover in this section is going to be the user flow. So user flow is a chart that actually allows you to see the path a user took through your website from entrance to exit. You can play with the filters that are up here at the top of this list to see what the user did based on any of the pieces of information that are in this chart. So let's go to this one here, look at the user flow here. So if there's a specific page on my website that I want to actually track user interaction through, I can say the store.html. I can click on that, and then I can explore traffic through here. And what it does is it rebuilds this entire chart based on that store page. So, and then if I want to highlight the traffic through there, I can see in the context of this specific chart, what country the user was from, where they came into the website, and what pages they went through before they got into that store page. And then after they arrived at the store page, I can then continue to add steps to this chart to see what they did after they went through my store page. So in this example here, some people went and looked at the Google redesign and apparel page. Other people went to the basket, and other people went to another 100 or so more pages. So this section really, when we get into some of the other sections that I'm going to cover here, this specific piece of information can literally allow you to track a user as they come in from an advertising campaign, where they go from that point, and you can find where a majority of your drop-offs are happening. And if there's a problem with that point on your site, you'll be able to see it here. All right, so that was a lot, and I'd like to open it up for some questions. All right, so Kevin McNulty, how do I set up a conversion in analytics without an ad campaign? So setting up the conversions in there is actually going to be done through the admin section. There is a audience definition here and then custom definitions. So you can add both of those things into this section. And another thing to keep in mind with analytics is it's constantly changing. So how that actually works today, next week might be completely different. But it is something that you can actually set up and define in here. Though I will say, just from my personal experience, it is not as simple as setting that up, setting up the information in Google Ads. You still have the ability to. So what if I want to measure how people purchase a widget or order a catalog, but I'm not running an ad campaign? It's the same thing. You would have to, like, it would be an event they'd be setting up. So you're setting up the action that you want someone to take would either be purchasing something, purchasing a widget, or ordering a catalog. You would have a page that has the order information on it, like if it's a cart, and you would set a tracker on that button that either adds it to the cart or lets them get more information. And then you would start listening to it as an event at that point. So once the user clicks on that button, it doesn't matter what they do from that point forward, as long as they get to either the checkout or the request more information step. And then at that point, it becomes your conversion. Does that answer your question? Was there any other questions about that? All right, move forward here. The next section we're going to talk about is going to be acquisition. So moving into acquisition, this section is all about where your users came from. The overview page quickly breaks out the data into different incoming paths. Organic search is Google results. Direct is people typing in your website's address. Referral is another site pointing towards yours. Social is your social media sites. Affiliates are other websites that you are advertising on independently of Google. And display is other websites where you're running Google display ads on. And then paid search is the Google search. Paid search is the Google search advertising that you do in Google Ads. So the first thing we're going to look at is the all channels. This breaks down the exact same information that's in the overview, just into a little bit different chart format, and allows you to start applying additional metrics and filters to it. All this really does is it kind of helps you confirm where people are actually coming from. The channels and tree maps are literally the exact same pieces of information, just displayed in a different visual format for you to look at. Next, the source medium, you can get more specific data on the sites that are directing traffic to you. So you might see like a youtube.com or an amazon.com with what type of traffic it was. So this one here, this was the creatoracademy.youtube.com, and it was referral traffic. If there was another link incoming from the creatoracademy.youtube.com and it was a organic thing that they have listed on their site, it would show up with a different tag after the slash. Next is referrals, which these are just the individual top level domains that are sending users to you. It's literally the same information basically through that whole thing. You can just see where people are coming from. So the Google Ads section of this, I'm going to be skipping over a good chunk of this just because in the demo account that I have set up here, the information is actually not going to be very relevant because it's like I said, it's a demo account. But basically the data that is in here is pulled directly from your Google Ads account. So you can see the actual campaigns that you have set up that are in your Google Ads account. You can see a tree map based on your individual, again, your campaigns. So if they're coming in through just a generic page, generic campaign you have set up, or if they're coming in through a specific campaign. Again, without looking at Google Ads, a lot of the stuff that's in here isn't necessarily going to be useful. The things that I normally use this for is to come in here and see what my most common final URLs are, which is where after someone has gone through, coming through an ad campaign, what their most common final page is, to see if, again, if there's a step during my advertising process that people are just leaving the site for some reason, either through a problem on it or they're just not able to complete the purchase. Next, Search Console. Again, this is the same data that's being pulled in from your Google Search Console. I typically recommend people just, instead of focusing on it in here or looking at it in here, looking at it through the actual Search Console. You already have the account, you have a lot more control, and you have a lot more filters that are available in Search Console than in here. All right, social. Social breaks down how users interact with your website and the content that you share on different social media platforms. It allows you to see where you have the most user engagement from in relation to social media, and allows you to track user flow from the social sites all the way through your website. It really allows you to see if users from a specific platform are dropping off in a specific place on your website, and can really help you convert users from networks that you are not focusing on. So overall, this whole section breaks down where your traffic is coming from based on social networks. You can see in this example, YouTube is the #1 referring site into this. By looking at your network referrals, you can see the all set, like this top chart breaks down all of the sessions that your site got and how many of the compared to against how many were coming from a social network. So that, and again, it allows you to quickly click through them and filter the data out. Your landing pages for the social are the #1 pages that people are coming into your site on. Your conversions, again, it goes back to linking all of either the ads or setting up your conversion data yourself. Taking all that, tying it directly to social media, saying something like, hey, if the user came from YouTube or blogger.com, associate that with this. And if they complete one of the actions that I'm expecting them to take, count that as a conversion. Plugins are if you have social media plugins on individual sites, you can see how people are interacting with the different social media plugins you have listed on your site. So if you have a Facebook plugin or a Twitter plugin on your site, this allows you to track people that are using that individual plugin and see what they're doing after they do that. And then user flow, again, this is the same chart that we were looking at in the audience section. Again, it allows you to highlight traffic through specific places on your site and see, one, where a user came from, and two, what they did after they interacted with a specific page. When we get down into the actual behavior section, I'll kind of get into it a little bit more, but the main thing that I use this for is seeing, hey, I have an ad campaign. Like I said, where are they coming in for my ad campaign? Are they making it to either a purchase page or a contact page? And if not, where during that process are they dropping off? And then finally, campaigns. This is just another aggregated view of the data from Google Ads. It allows you to quickly view data on your paid keywords and any organic keywords that line up from data with your website, and then gives you a cost analysis based on that info from Google Ads. The other thing with this is in the admin section, when you're setting up the events and things like that, you can set up how much an event is actually worth to you. So let's say you want users who fill out your contact form to be worth $5 to you. You can set that up. And then what it does is it actually allows you to put in there how many times you had how many transactions you had and how much revenue they generated based on that. This can also pull data directly from shopping carts that it's integrated into. So it'll has the ability to track individual like cart totals and how much a user spent and then put it into this. All right. So questions about the acquisition section. All right. Go ahead and move on. Next is going to be behavior. So this is the final section that I'm going to cover, starting with the overview section. By default, the graph shows unique page views over time. It can also show you your standard page views, your unique page views, your average time spent on page, your average bounce rate, and your exit percentage. So page views are the total number of times a page was loaded into a user's browser. Unique page views count only one user per user, or one view per user, versus how many times a user loaded the same page. So if a user came to your site, left your site, came right back to the same page, it still only counts that as one. The average amount of time they spent on page for all of your users. Then your bounce rate. A bounce is when a user spends 0 seconds on a page. That literally means they're clicking on your page and then they're immediately leaving. So your bounce rate is the total number of percentage of users who visited your site versus those who bounced. And then your exit percentage is the percent of time that users exit your site from one of the pages that's listed in this list currently. So this exit percentage can be defined down to individual pages. So behavior flow. So again, this goes back to what I was referring to earlier. This just allows you to track what's going on with the individual pages that are on your site. So the landing page is and actually let's switch over to this view. So your landing page is the page the user came in on. And then the very next thing, the starting page, is the very first thing they interacted with. So if, for instance, you have a user that's coming in on the homepage of this, they're interacting with something on the homepage before they move on to something else. Whereas there are some other pages that are either redirect pages or they are like a landing page for an ad campaign, where instead of interacting with anything on the page, the users decided to go straight to the homepage. So you can see by highlighting the traffic through here that as users come in, you have 65 drop-offs, which means people are coming to this page, not finding what they're looking for and leaving. And then the remaining people move on to other pages in the site. And you can track that directly at this, up to, I believe it's 20 or 30 steps out. So you can track an individual user as they come into your site, they use your site, and then you can see where the average number of users that are on your site are leaving from, which again can help you identify either weak spots on your website, or if you have a problem with your website that you weren't 100% aware of. That's mainly what I use this chart for when I'm reviewing this with clients. we set up an advertising campaign in Google Ads, we send them to a landing page, and then from the landing page, we're saying, hey, what are users doing after they visit the landing page? If the user is going and filling out a contact form, or they're diving deeper into the site to find a specific piece of information, then what that allows me to do is say, hey, I have this landing page that's set up to sell shoes, and it's a very generic page that's set up around selling shoes. Well, once people are getting to this page, if they're suddenly diving into a very specific type of shoe, then what I might consider doing is going to whatever that type of shoe is. Say it's blue suede shoes. Then if I can take the information about those blue suede shoes, put it on the landing page, and see if I'm getting a faster conversion from that user because they're finding the information they're looking for right away without having to dig for it. There's an old adage that you have 3 clicks or less to get the information that the user is searching for in front of them, or you're going to lose them. And this allows us to make sure that the information we are presenting to users is getting in front of them as quickly as possible without them having to dig through the whole site. All right. So site content literally breaks down all of the data about your website that Google has collected through the analytics thing and allows you to see it all in one place. This allows you to dive deeper into stats for each individual page and quickly see what your top page for each stat is. So if you want to know what your highest page view page is, which page has the highest number of unique page views, which page has the highest amount of time spent on page, your number one page that is an entrance page, which is outside coming in, what your highest bounce rate page is, your highest exit page, and if you've assigned a value to a page, say either a conversion page, a contact page, you can assign a value to it, and then it shows up in here and shows you how much that is actually worth. So moving on, sorry, I guess let me click through these real quick. The content drill down allows you to focus on this information based on directory, and the landing pages and exit pages are the same information from the all pages, just filters out any pages that are not either landing pages or are not exit pages. So next, site speed. This is the amount of time it took for each page in your site to load for a user. This is the same information that would be pulled from the site page speed website that I talked about in Search Console. So this should always be as small a number as possible and should look pretty flat. If the load times are all over the place, then you should consider speaking with your web host to figure out what the issue is. Or if you have recently implemented a change to your website that is either a new plugin or a new piece of content, and suddenly your page times are spiking well above what the norm is, it's something for you to go and look at and say, hey, we need to optimize this because we're going to end up losing people because the site is loading so slowly. So also, if the page load times are constantly in excess of 5 seconds, then you really should consider going through the site and decreasing not only the page size, but also reducing the image size to help the site load as fast as possible. Next, moving on to page timings. This allows you to see individual comparisons of all of your page load times compared to your site average. So if there's a page that has a very long load time compared to the rest of your site, then it shows up as a high number, and everything else typically shows up as a negative number. This should allow you to isolate and correct any large or slow pages you have on your website. Next, the site speed suggestions. Again, this is actually linked directly to the Google Page Speed tool, which I don't know, it's going to load for me right now. But all it does is it lists out your individual pages and gives you what Google thinks your number is from that other site. And by clicking on them, it literally takes you off to that site and it runs the actual checker, and you can see what Google is recommending you do to improve your site. So yeah, and it failed to load. It's actually something that's new that they're still trying to integrate. So site search, this section here is purely dedicated around the old Google Site Search plugin that you used to be able to download and install on your website. It was a plugin that allowed users to search, and it would automatically try and index your whole site without having a dynamic site. A majority of websites now have this function built in, specifically if you're using something like a WordPress or a Joomla or a Wix. But this section is not going to show any data unless you have that plugin installed on your website. So it's a little bit an old thing. Eventually it'll be gone. Next is going to be your events. So like I said before, this is something that you would actually predefine. This allows you to track more accurately. So I'm going to actually switch over to this view, go into events, and yeah. So this section allows you to track more accurately which contacts and events are coming from your ad campaign users versus which contacts and events are happening with users that are finding your site through organic means. That's the main thing that I end up using this for. So if I have like if one of the events that I'm tracking is users filling out a contact form and the majority of them are coming from a paid campaign versus organically, then I know my paid campaign is doing work and it's actually doing exactly what I want it to. Whereas if the information is reversed and a majority of my contacts are coming from my organic search and I'm paying people to come and fill out that contact form, then I know that I'm not targeting the right people with my ad campaign. And it can really give you a pretty good idea of who you're targeting with your ad campaigns and helps you identify that you need to skew that information based on who those actual users are. The next part of the event of this section is your pages. So this is the list of all of the pages that have events on them that you are listening to, and you can see which events pages are actually tracking correctly and which page actually has the most common event that takes place on it. So you can either focus on identifying and promoting that specific event and that specific page, or you can say, hey, this other page that I'm paying for is not performing as well. I need to dig into this page and figure out why that's not happening. So this also has a flow chart. It's a little bit different in the sense that once you have an event defined, it allows you to see after an event started, what point you're actually losing the user. So if you have, say, a 4-step event, you can see, let's highlight traffic through here. We have a 4-step event, and you want your average event, your typical event, to be a straight line from left to right across the top. If people are diving off to another page before they're getting back into your event process, and it's a majority of users, then you can say, hey, what part of this is not actually happening correctly? And you still have the same general controls that you do in the other section. The next is publisher. Publisher is if you have Google AdSense set up on your site. So that's Google AdSense. Mainly going to skip this because a majority of businesses will not have this installed on their website. This allows other companies to advertise on your website, and a majority of the companies that you're going to interact with aren't going to want to potentially lose sales. The last thing we're going to talk about is experiments. So experiments loads the Google Optimize plugin, which is a plugin that allows you to do A/B testing on your website by randomly showing one of two different versions of the same web page to your user. This allows you to constantly improve your website, and it's something that every business should always consider looking at, because if a website grows stagnant, then Google over time will slowly lower its ranking. So by constantly looking into improving each individual page and by doing A/B testing, it helps not only with your ranking, but it'll also help improve the quality of content you're giving to your users. The biggest takeaway I always give my clients when I'm speaking about this is that you don't know if your website could be doing better if you're not changing it. So, for instance, if you're averaging 10 to 20 user submissions from your contact page per month, and you redesign that page and reduce the number of fields that the user needs to fill out, then you could increase that contact number from 70 to 80. So a website should not be a fixed thing. It should always be evolving with not only your company, but with whatever your advertising goals are. And that really does wrap up that section, and I think a majority of what I wanted to talk about. So is there any questions about that section, or questions in general about anything that I've covered? doesn't look like it. So just kind of like a recap. I want to I'm going to wrap up by reiterating again the purpose of these two different tools. Search Console allows you to see how Google views your website and how users got to your website. And Analytics is used for tracking what happens once users get to your website. I know I covered quite a bit of information here, so if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me or your own webmaster, and you can just dig into this information that I've given you a little bit, or you can go through the information that has already been collected on your site. I'd really like to thank the Chamber for allowing me to give this presentation, and for all of you for taking the time out of your day to listen to me explain this. I know it's very heavy, but yeah, thank you, and I hope everyone has a good day. And all
And
right, so
let me just get my video back on here. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry,
All
Nick
right.
actually asked a question. I just want to answer
Oh,
real
sure.
quick.
Perfect.
It says, how would you suggest someone get started with analytics? The getting started with analytics is pretty simple and straightforward. Getting it installed on your site is the number one thing. Once it is, I always recommend people focus on the behavior section first before diving into the other ones, because it really allows you to see what people are doing with your site. And if you have a specific problem on your site, content wise, that you might not have thought about. So that's typically where I tell people when they're first getting into it, yeah, focus on the behavior section. The rest of the information that is listed there will become valuable to you and make more sense the longer you use the program. Thank you, Nick.
Oh, all right. If there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you, Chris, for all that information. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And also a quick thank you to our sponsors, LaPensi Plumbing, Pools and Air, and Veritas Pest Management. And as I had said in the beginning, we'll be sending out an email with information about accessing the recording of this webinar. So thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening and stay safe. Thanks.
Thank you.